Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I have another case for you. And if you're anything like me, you probably have never heard of this case, and I was actually quite shocked. Really quick, I want to say thank you to all of my viewers, and please subscribe if you like my channel. So love makes us do crazy things. Like, this is nothing new. I think we all have been here when we really love someone and are passionate about them, and we can do some crazy things or some things which would surprise us. There's healthy partners, and there's controlling and toxic, jealous partners. So Pedro Bravo was the latter. He was jealous by nature and very competitive. Pedro was dating his high school girlfriend, Erica Freeman, for about 3 years. They went to the same high school, they had the same friends, and they grew up and lived in Miami, Florida. Pedro was described as the class clown, very funny, kind of lighthearted, and overall just a nice guy who never really showed any signs of violence or any acts of aggression. Pedro's best friend is named Christian Aguilar. He was described as very intelligent, he loved school, his friends, just an all-around normal 17-year-old guy. And Pedro and Erica and Christian all kind of grew up together. They hung out together, they were familiar, and they even all went to prom together. So after 3 years, Erica decides she doesn't want this relationship with Pedro anymore. She feels she has gotten distant and has just outgrown him, and she's not happy anymore. She doesn't have what she needs. Erica brings this up and she says maybe, we should have some distance, maybe we should break up. And Pedro basically just manipulates her into staying with him. She stays for a little while, but then she just can't take it anymore and she has to break up with him for good. And that's what she does. Pedro does not take this breakup well at all.
But as graduation approaches, Pedro and Erica's puppy romance is almost over.
At one point, you decided that this relationship wasn't working for you.
Yes, I did. I had talked to him about it. I was like, maybe we should go on a break. I don't think I'm happy. I felt like he almost manipulated me at that point of my life.
Erica breaks up with Pedro, and abruptly, the class clown's laughter is replaced with tears.
He was very emotional about it. He was very, he cried a lot. He was very, it was not what I was expecting at all when I broke up with him.
He would write very sad and emotional things in his journal. He struggled with depression from this breakup.
The journal Pedro kept, a brooding meditation on his quest to win Erica back. "No one will stop me," he wrote. "I will get out of Miami and into Gainesville, and I will get her back."
So Erica feels bad, but she knows she has to do what's right for her, so she stays single from Pedro. And Erica then moves from Miami to Gainesville in order to attend college. She wants to start fresh, and she attends Santa Fe Community College in Gainesville. So Christian, Pedro's best friend, is also in Gainesville at this time. He's also going to college. Instead, he's going to UF, University of Florida. So this is actually not too far from Santa Fe College, Erica's college, and they both realize that they're both in Gainesville. So being familiar with one another, they hang out and they get to know each other. They are kind of feeling out this new city with each other. They had been friends for years, but somehow this felt different. It felt special, and they decided to try dating each other. Erica had moved on from Pedro, and she was happy. She was becoming an adult and finding what she wanted in life and what she didn't want, and Christian was happy as well. Pedro, on the other hand, was not. He still had not gotten over Erica. He had not gotten over the breakup, and he was very angry still, and his journals show that.
In it, Pedro's personal and meticulous self-help plan to get rid of acne, whiten his teeth, and even wear a red shirt because he thinks it will be more eye-catching to the opposite sex. His handwritten musings winding around seemingly unrelated sketches of cartoon characters, monsters, and sometimes sentimental doodlings.
They almost looked like he could have been a cartoonist. They were very beautiful pieces of art.
His drawings, what kind of drawings were they?
I just saw, pictures of hearts. There was captions next to the hearts. There were broken hearts. hearts in tiny pieces.
Adding insult to injury, Pedro now hears through the grapevine that his true love's heart now belongs to one of his best friends, Christian. The journal revealing his increasing anguish. I feel as if someone stabbed me, and I bleeded out and died. I want her back. Please, I'll give anything.
Pedro felt rejected, and I know that being rejected never feels good, and we feel these emotions for a while, but we move on. We find somebody else and we become happy with life again. Pedro just could not. He could not get over it. So what Pedro decides to do is move from Miami. He was attending college in Miami. Instead, he up and moves to Gainesville, of all places. Erica was shocked when she found out. She was nervous. Her ex had essentially stalked her and is following her to Gainesville when she knew he was attending college in Miami. Eventually, Pedro finds out about Erica and Christian dating, and it's not good. He is furious. Now, Christian was his close friend, and Erica is his ex-girlfriend, so I can understand how he's feeling. However, it's not as though she cheated on Pedro. He even talks about hurting himself, but he doesn't. So eventually, Pedro reaches out to Christian, of all people, and asks for help. He says, I'm going through this hard time. I'm struggling with depression, so can you help me? So when Erica found this out, she was skeptical for a reason. Her very depressed and angry ex is now reaching out to her boyfriend. She didn't think that it could really end well, and they were both apprehensive. However, Christian did agree to finally meet him on campus. So he thought, what is the harm? It's on campus. Nothing is going to happen. So Pedro and Christian meet up at UF campus, and from there, they kind of go for a car ride together. They are running some errands together while they're talking about what's going on. Pedro's car is seen in Walmart. However, no one is getting in or out of the vehicle. It's just sitting in the parking lot. During this time, Erica has been texting Christian, asking, how is it going? Is it awkward? What's going on? And he still hasn't answered. Pedro is seen driving out of town. He's caught on multiple cameras driving 5 hours out of town. And not only that, but at the same time, Pedro's phone is turned on airplane mode. So Pedro is off the grid for about 5 hours. No one hears from him, and his phone has been on airplane mode this whole time. So that's not a good sign. Finally, at 4 a.m., Pedro is seen at a McDonald's drive-thru where he's getting some food, and he goes back home. When he reaches home, Erica calls him and says, I haven't heard from Christian. What's going on? Have you heard from him? Have you talked to him? And, Pedro just says, no, I dropped him off at home, but everything seems fine. We did get into a verbal argument, by the way, but everything's fine. So, of course, this worries Erica. I can't imagine how she's feeling. It's 5 in the morning. She still has not heard from Christian. So, morning comes just a couple of hours later, and Erica still cannot get a hold of Christian. So Erica calls Pedro and says, I'm going to the police and you're coming with me. So that's what they do. They report him missing, and pretty early on, the police are a little bit skeptical of Pedro and his story. His story has changed multiple times, and he was the last person to see Christian. That alone is not a good sign. So Pedro tells police that basically he left Christian in the woods after they got into this heated argument, but, Christian was very much alive and he was okay. He just left him in the woods and drove off. But again, his story kept changing, and the police just were not buying it.
Never seemed violent.
Never seemed violent.
Pedro says he came here to help, but everything that comes out of his mouth only cements his status as the prime suspect.
We're finding out new stuff that you haven't talked to me about before.
But I can tell you I was in that area.
At first, Pedro tells investigators that he left Aguilar in the woods, not far from Walmart, after arguing with him in the car.
I tell you everything I know, and I just go away.
They believe they are looking for a body, not a person who is alive. So the search for Christian was the largest in Gainesville history. I mean, it was huge. So many people wanted to find him and bring him home. The police then have enough evidence to arrest Pedro on circumstantial evidence. So 3 weeks go by and Pedro has kept his mouth shut. He refuses to tell the truth or say what happened, and he just has not talked to the police. 22 days after Pedro's arrest, 2 hunters in the woods come across a body. And that body sadly belonged to Christian. Erica is absolutely heartbroken. Her partner that she recently fell in love with is now gone, and they barely got to experience their life together. Pedro is charged with premeditated murder, and the evidence against him is mounting by the minute. And the prosecutors showed the jury some pretty damning evidence against Pedro. 4 days before Christian met up with Pedro, Pedro bought pesticide, Gatorade, a shovel, sleeping pills, and duct tape, as well as a knife, which he paid cash for.
Computer evidence. Turns out that Pedro Googled suspicious search terms such as buying anesthetics. What is chloroform, and how do sleeping pills kill you?
At 1:35, he does a search, good anesthetic chemical. At 1:35, he does another search. Can rubbing alcohol knock someone out?
The prosecution claims that days after Pedro completed his homicidal research, he arranged to meet Christian.
So the police basically recreate what they think happened to Christian. So they believe that Christian was killed by Pedro in Pedro's car. They believed he killed him with a belt. They believe he strangled him from behind. And they also believe that he was drugged, since he did drink the Gatorade that Pedro gave to him. So Pedro's defense lawyer tried to paint this picture of, my client is suicidal and the sleeping pills and pesticide and Gatorade was for himself. He was going to harm himself. And Pedro claims that even though he and Christian did actually have a physical fight about Erica, he claims Christian was left alive and that he didn't harm him. So here's where it gets interesting. A cellmate of Pedro comes forward with a story of his own.
Quite a bit, as they called to the stand a prisoner with the improbable name Michelangelo. With gun, drugs, and kidnapping charges to his name, he's a true Renaissance man of crime.
Are you a convicted felon?
Yes, sir.
Do you know how many times you've been convicted?
9 times.
The plot thickened with Michelangelo's testimony.
The felon shared a cell with Pedro Bravo in the fall of 2012, and when they met, Angelo dispensed with the small talk.
I was like, he probably killed that kid, And
what was his response to that?
He really didn't answer,
Bravo's plan was to use Angelo's outside gang contacts to commit murders similar to Chris's to make it appear that a serial killer was on the loose, thus leading suspicion away from Bravo.
He said that he was going to try to poison him with a mixture of sleeping pills and pesticide mixed with soda. And his backup plan was to have a knife, to cut his throat. And his main plan was to choke him with a moving strap.
And Pedro's lawyer says this inmate can't be trusted. He is basically a snitch and he's a felon, so he can't be trusted. So finally, a verdict is in. Guilty. So Christian's family can kind of rejoice in a way. And even though it doesn't bring Christian back, they at least know that Pedro cannot do this to any other person and that, justice is kind of served. Pedro is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I don't understand why people do this. He's jealous of his ex and their new relationship. If he just realized that if he just waited a couple of months and went to college and lived his life, he would have found somebody else and lived his life. And, breakups happen to all of us. He just could not handle it. But in the end, an innocent life was lost, and Pedro doesn't have a girl, he's not in college, and he didn't get Erica back. So it's just, cases like this really baffle me. So that's going to be it for today, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my videos, please subscribe. It really helps me out. Thank you, guys.